Hello, everyone. If you're new here, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner. And today I wanted to react to this video by Abbey Sharp because one, I really like who she is on the internet. She is a registered dietitian. She has tons of really great videos all about her dietitian. She breaks down myths and rules and all sorts of different things. Really, really appreciate her. We need more people like her on the platform. And she's opening up about mental health stuff today, which I am also very, very passionate about. So I wanted to take a look at it from more of a primary care provider lens and see what's going on. Let's dive right into it. And I just want to highlight real quick off the bat that she is expressing something that I feel like a ton of people feel. If you do feel like that, please do know that there is support out there for you. It can feel totally endless and cyclical. I know with my own anxiety and depression, it just feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel and you're never going to be able to get out of it. You can get out of it. It can get better. And if you are feeling truly, truly hopeless, I will leave the link to the suicide hotline down in the description below. Please check that out. Everyone else, just please go seek help however you need it and let someone know that you're struggling because it can get better.
So
she's like
it's never easy to admit when you feel like you're failing at something, especially when you're like a perfectionist like me. And I think when a lot of us like watch these journeys on Instagram or YouTube, we expect to see a very familiar pattern. We want to see the problem. We want to see that there's some kind of solution or journey that we're going through to fix the problem. And then there's the happily ever after. And like, I guess I got that. I showed that with my IVF journey, with my eating disorder after the fact, but that is just not how the cards are stacked for this. So I want to catch you guys up to speed and be absolutely honest and transparent with you because there's a lot.
And for so many people, that's not how mental health is either. It's not oh, here, this happened. I'm going to go through this treatment and then I'm going to be happily ever after. It's going to be fixed forever. This is a lot like other emotions, such as grief, where it's just, you have to adapt with it. Sometimes they're going to be harder than others. You're learning to live with something rather than just getting through it and pushing on. If you have situational anxiety, obviously that's different. Something where you've never had this before and all of a sudden this is occurring and we can kind of get you through it. And then you're fine. You're going back to your baseline, which was not having anxiety and depression. But if you have any kind of chronic mental health condition, this is something that you're going to have to learn to live with versus getting through. You know what I mean? I also want to just stress on her how she talked about she felt like she couldn't come and talk about it because it was embarrassing and she was failing. This is a super common feeling. I felt it myself when I ended up going to get help from anxiety and depression. I will link the videos down below where I've talked about that. But this is so, so common. People feel like since it's their brain that it's an organ that has like let them down as if they had control over it versus I've never had a patient walk into my office and be like, oh, I am all of a sudden in, having someone with type 1 diabetes come in and be like,
I am really embarrassed that my pancreas doesn't work.
You aren't embarrassed when different organs react differently. So we don't need to be embarrassed when our brain is doing the same thing.
This is hard. So to like catch you up, I just finished my herbal antimicrobials to tackle the hydrogen bacteria overgrowth that I had after I eradicated the methane dominant bacteria. And I was feeling like really good. I was happy. My bowel movements were good. My bloating was low. It was all looking pretty good. So I went on a little family vacation for March break with my kids in Florida. And I mean, like travel with kids is always stressful.
Amen. Amen. We don't even. It's too stressful. So we don't. And I wanted to touch on something she said a minute ago, which was she was talking about her different herbal supplements and overcoming certain bacteria. She has talked before about having SIBO, which is small intestine bacterial overgrowth, is basically when the bacteria that's in your small intestine, we all have, our whole gut is filled with different bacteria. We call it usually good bacteria. But if you have an imbalance of it, sometimes this could be where it sounds like she has too much of a certain type of bacteria, which causes a lot of bloating, nausea, discomfort, diarrhea, all sorts of those things. And she's getting treatment for it. She's with I'm assuming a gastroenterologist for it. This is in no way something we would normally treat in primary care, but this has been an ongoing problem for her, is a lot of GI problems related to this SIBO. So she's very careful about what she eats and tries to manage it that way. But that's what she's talking about here.
Don't get me wrong. I love it. I love to spend that time, undivided time with the kids, but it's stressful. You're in a different place. I'm staying with family. It's a lot, at least for me. And I feel like that's often like a bit of a disruption to some of my comfortable routines. And with eating specifically, eating for SIBO or whatever, it means I have to be be like more flexible to just accommodate everyone else. So like I'm eating more restaurant foods, and I would say that sometimes I would have to like have like a mini meal, because if everyone was going out for brunch or for breakfast or for lunch, I maybe wasn't super hungry. So I would have like a mini meal and then a bigger meal later. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I did the best that I could, and I kept up with my supplements, and my bowel movements were actually pretty good and normal while I was away. So that was like the food and digestion piece in Florida. Insomnia wise,
Can we just appreciate Abby for normalizing talking about our bowel movements in our gut? Because we all do it. Everybody poops. Okay. This is something patients are always super embarrassed about. I'm like, I was a GI nurse for years. Let's just talk about it. But it's okay. I appreciate you, Abby, for bringing up the fact that we all go to the bathroom and it's okay to talk about it.
I also slept pretty well in Florida, which is actually really surprising to me because I normally do not. But twice while I was in Florida.
So she also has long-standing insomnia difficulties. And this is interesting because it combines two of the things that we often see with people who do have any type of underlying anxiety. Is we see a lot of stuff going on in the gut and a lot of stuff going as trouble with sleep. And that's usually actually one of the presenting symptoms that patients would come in with, is they would say, I'm not sleeping and I'm having all of this diarrhea or constipation, this GI trouble. And it's not that your anxiety is literally causing the GI, that is not the causal link for it. However, those emotions of anxiety and stress, those symptoms of the anxiety will cause all of the GI troubles, because your gut is super duper linked to your mood. So kind of sometimes your gut's the first thing to even start speaking. If you can't quite verbalize yet, like, hey, this is kind of going on, my mind is racing, same exact thing with your brain. The mechanism that causes anxiety is not also causing you to not be able to sleep. However, the symptom of your mind racing all the time and needing to worry about everything and, oh my gosh, did I do this? Do I that? That's going to make it really, really hard to sleep. And with depression, it's so overwhelming sometimes that you sleep too much. So while those are not causally linked by necessarily the same exact mechanism, your gut and your brain and your sleep are all very, very mixed. And a lot of the times you will notice those symptoms before you actually can sit down and be like, whoa, I'm having a rough time emotionally.
I don't know, like maybe I just was eating intuitively and it was hot that day and I didn't feel like a really big heavy meal for dinner, and I probably had something lighter than usual. And I woke up in the middle of the night to pee as I normally do, and I felt hungry. So I went and got a snack. But it wasn't just like have a snack and go to bed, feel good. It was like I had a snack and I had to go to bed and I still was hungry. So it happened like another snack. And this probably would happen like 3 times before I could quell the hunger and actually get back to sleep. So it seems like a totally normal thing and not a big deal. But this is really the difference between a normal healthy mind and a mind with an anxiety disorder. Because this is really like how we have a recipe here for like a perfect anxiety, insomnia, IBS storm. So long story short, the day we traveled home, my normal bathroom routine got like thrown off. And I know it's super normal and super common.
IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. So it can be presented in a ton of different ways. That's essentially what I was talking about with your gut being linked to your emotions. And sometimes your stomach starts talking before the rest of your body can catch up. So you can either have constipation with IBS, diarrhea with IBS, or a combination of both. But basically you are not pooping on the reg, if you know what I mean. Things are different down there.
And for like travel days or like traveling in general, just like mess up our digestion or our usual kind of bathroom routine. So I don't know if you guys experience that yourself, like leave me a note below. We're all in this together. But again, normally I can kind of like get back on track the next day. But this time I didn't. I was so anxious about not pooping basically before I got on the plane. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I got super uncomfortable, very bloated, very gassy, super constipated all week long. And I still have not gotten back to my kind of Florida or pre-travel poops, if that makes sense. And again, this to most people would be like not a big deal. But for me, with my history of my SIBO and everything I've gone through to get to this point, I am terrified. Like in the middle of the night, I'd be laying in bed, feeling uncomfortably constipated. Like I really just want to go, but I can't because.
And that's really hard. One of the things with anxiety that happens is you are so anxious that your anxiety is going to get back. It's kind of like a feedback loop, right? You're so baseline anxiety is just being so worried about so many things. So you're worried that you're going to become worried. So then you do get worried, and then you're worried about the side effects of being worried, which then makes you more worried, and it just makes it so much worse. And that's how it snowballs, right? So this is something that can build up into then having all these other symptoms with your GI, then you're not sleeping. And then when you're not sleeping, you're not thinking clearly, which feeds back into the anxiety. And that's kind of the loop that people can start to get in. And having been in a loop, kind of in a loop currently, if we're being totally frank, it sucks. Because for most people, if you don't have anxiety, you can think like, oh, okay, like rationally, you can see that, okay, my plan's getting home from vacation, it's going to be fine tomorrow, right? I can see that this is going to go back to normal. It's going to take place. I relate to her in this because I have pretty impressive anxiety. And when I get home from a trip, I can't picture the world being okay again. I'm like, my house is always going to be messy. I'm always going to be living out of a suitcase. I'm not going to be able to do this. And then I'm going to get behind here. And then it just snowballs into like something that my husband can very rationally be like, okay, we need to clean up. And my brain is like, I'm going to be living in absolute filth forever. I'm never going to get anything else done in my life. And it's a very real feeling. So
because of my anxiety and this overwhelming fear that the SIBO's coming back and I'm never going to get it under control. And it is like debilitating. The fear alone is debilitating. And that is not even like the whole story here. That's the SIBO bit. So like shelf that for like a hot minute.
That hopelessness, and this is why I like covering these types of things in case it reaches one of you who is feeling that hopelessness, whether it's with anxiety, depression, or any other mental illness, is it feels like a black hole you are never going to crawl out of. And that is because it's on that feedback loop, like we talked about, and you can get out of the black hole. I promise. Please go get help. I think she's going to talk about, I'm assuming by the video title that she's going to go and get a little bit of help with that.
I had a whole other weird problem that I was concurrently dealing with. Basically, when I got home, I found myself waking up in the middle of the hungry. Like I'd get up to pee and immediately I'd think I'm hungry. And no amount of food could quell my hunger. Like I'm going to talk numbers for a second, so please trigger warning if this is too much for you. But I would eat a whole normal day of food, maybe like 2,000 calories of food. Totally normal for me. I'd get to after dinner time and I would have like a 500 calorie snack just as assurance that I wouldn't wake up hungry. And then I'd wake up anyways. And as soon as I would be up, the first thought in my mind was, I'm going to get hungry. And obviously it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because the mind and the gut are so intimately connected that I would feel hungry and I'd have to go downstairs to have a snack. So I'd go down and have a snack, which would wake me up more. It would just interfere with my ability to get back to sleep more. I'd have a snack, I'd go back upstairs, I'd feel full. I'd lay in bed, bam, I'm hungry. I'm still hungry. I'd go back downstairs, have another snack. It would go on and on and on.
And this is something where a lot of the times, if you have anxiety and depression, we'll recommend combining some kind of like, if you want to do a medication treatment along with therapy, because therapy can be really helpful to come in and put a stop to those cycles of anxiety spirals, is what I call them, anxiety spirals in my own life. They can give you ways to identify that this is a spiral and take yourself out and help you view it how other people would look at it, which is objectively, this is going to be okay. This is going to stop. We're going to be able to overcome this. That's where therapy is super duper helpful. Difficult because at least in the US, it's very expensive. Even if you have insurance, if you don't have insurance, I mean, there are community health resources. They're just very difficult to get into. But a reason we don't value mental health enough. So we need to value mental health more. Whenever there's anything to vote for about mental health, always vote for it.
And this is not like a typical binge. There was nothing about this that was like, oh, I'm going to sneak down to the kitchen and have a slice of cake when nobody's watching. No, this was like, oh my gosh, please, can I just make this physiological feeling of hunger, this ravenous eating at my stomach hunger go away so I can go back to sleep? That was what I was experiencing. It was bizarre.
And Abby's talked before, she has a history of disordered eating, and which is also a common accompaniment to especially anxiety, because it's something that you can either you're trying to restrict in some way, you're trying to control your life. And then we all know like that usually doesn't happen, or you're not viewing it with a clear lens because your anxiety is telling you something totally different. So for her, I would imagine this would be even more stressful because now she knows in the back of her mind, I'm sure it's triggering some of those things of, is this, I don't want to be eating this much. Am I really this hungry? She talks a lot about intuitive eating. I'm sure this was also just a different additional layer on top of all of that of stress for her.
So, I've talked to my therapist about issues like this in the past. And often she has said that I have some kind of OCD-like tendencies. And I know that, like, they've come out in the past with my eating disorder, and they've come out with in my sleep. Often, all of these issues have kind of compulsive or obsessive natures to them.
OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it is kind of in the anxiety family where you usually have to do a repetition of a certain task in order to feel like you can move on and go to the next stage, whether that's like around, oh, I have to do this before I can leave my house. I have to go check my door 5 times, or that's the most common type. And then also some people, they'll hear, oh, I have to clean a certain thing, but the most usually it's like a repetition of I need to do these certain steps in order to control my anxiety. And if I do it the perfect way, then I can move on and I can leave my house.
And in the past with my sleep, I would often like create this crutch, this habit with my sleep, and I would need to perform it perfectly out of fear that if I didn't, I wouldn't sleep. And then that would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I know this about myself. I know what my mind is capable of. And I knew that the hunger that I was feeling at night wasn't like an actual physiological need for more calories.
And I'm glad she pointed out there about knowing what your brain is capable of. That's another huge benefit, I think, of therapy, is they can help you realize like, oh, this is just my brain doing my special anxiety thing. Like this is something that I have power over. My brain doesn't have to win here, but she's probably learned that and learned that her brain is even capable of making these things up in her mind, right? So that she can then realize, I am not my feelings. And that's a huge thing that you can get out of therapy.
But just like any other kind of compulsion or obsession, I know that the best thing to do is to really challenge those beliefs, to challenge those assumptions and those obsessions and the need to act out a specific ritual in a specific way, like going downstairs to getting another snack to eat. That is just reinforcing to me that I need to get up in the middle of the night to eat. And my rational brain knows that I don't. So the really difficult thing for me right now is going to be trying to balance out how to trust and honor my body while also not giving in to some of the kind of anxious compulsions that make me feel safe and make me feel comfortable. And honestly, that's just feeling like a lot.
4 to 6 days later.
So I went to go get some blood work done today, really just to rule out any kind of abnormalities with the blood sugars, just because it is strange that I'm getting so hungry in the middle of the night like that. But if I'm honest with myself, I think I know that the real issue is just that I need to get my anxiety better under control.
So this is good. The first thing we do want to rule out whenever someone is having any kind of mental health concern is everything okay everywhere else? You know what I mean? Like, are there glaring signs? You'd want to check your blood sugar. There's a certain type of pattern that can sometimes happen in people with diabetes where your blood sugar in the middle of the night, it all of a sudden tanks and you get really hungry. Most people will sleep through it, but it can actually be dangerous. So they're wanting to probably make sure also, I'm really sorry, Abby, let's move this ahead. This is not a good clip for you. Okay. That's a little better. Where you want to just make sure, hey, let's make sure it's not a blood sugar problem, that your thyroid's not doing anything crazy, that you are, you seem to have the right nutrients, everything going on there.
Control. And that might mean more medication in the future and more than just my regular sleep medication, my Dayvigo and my THC or CBD and my melatonin and supplements and things like that for sleep. It might just not be enough. And that feels like I'm opening up just like this whole new.
So it sounds like she normally takes Dayvigo, which is for insomnia. But she also just said she takes THC and CBD. I'm wondering if she meant to differentiate between the two. THC and CBD are very different. THC is marijuana, but that can make you hungry. We've used it a lot. I've seen it prescribed frequently for patient populations where you want them to eat, because in things like chronic conditions, cancer, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, a lot of the times your stomach is very upset, or you are just totally lacking the hunger aspect because your just body's been through a lot. And so you can give it to people and it makes them hungry. And I wonder if she's just having the munchies in the middle of the night. CBD is commonly used, also THC, for sleep, right? And usually when you get CBD, that's what you can get pretty much everywhere now. Most of that has the THC taken out of it. You can get it combined with both of them. CBD usually pretty good for pain, anxiety, stress, relief. A lot of people use it for sleep, but CBD usually doesn't make you hungry. The only way it can make you hungry is if it reduces the side effect of nausea, making you then hungry because you're not nauseous. But THC can definitely make you hungry. So I wonder if Abby do you just have the munchies, Abby? I mean, not just, I don't want to downplay it, but I wonder if they're going to look into that. So interestingly, all of those that she just mentioned, the Dayvigo, the melatonin, that'll help you sleep, the CBD, THC, those are more going to help you sleep and with anxiety. Also, if you hear my children screaming in the background, I apologize. This was my filming day and it's raining, so they're inside. Usually they're outdoor cats all summer, but there's some feelings in this house today. They're with a nanny, so they're okay. But I didn't hear anything in there specifically for anxiety. So that's going to be things like a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SNRI, similar to that, anything specific for anxiety. So I wonder if that's what we're going to discuss.
Scary can of worms. I'm terrified of becoming addicted because I know myself. I have a super addictive personality and I feel like I can't just take drugs away. I always have to add more. And my super duper anxiety, catastrophic belief in my mind that I've been working through in therapy for the past 10 years is kind of becoming a Michael Jackson situation.
Okay. So this is another thing we see all the time. I've felt it myself, people being really frightened to go onto medication for whatever reason. Hers, it sounds like she's really worried to come off of it. And I usually just stress to patients, there is a difference between becoming kind of tolerant to a medication, right? So it builds up, and some medicines, a lot of ones for psychiatry conditions too, you do become somewhat either tolerant on them or your body becomes dependent on them to function. But I like to stress to people that dependence is not addiction, right? So yes, your body might be used to having more serotonin or norepinephrine floating around or dopamine, because of the medicines. And so we don't want to just pull the rug out from it and be like, haha, sucker, like good luck doing this. If you stop the med cold turkey, that's very rude to your body. We would like to slowly, gradually let it off so that you don't have symptoms of, withdrawal symptoms. It doesn't mean you are addicted to it. It means your body's used to it. The thing that happens with addiction, the big difference here is when you have addiction to a substance, you crave it when you don't have it, and you will do damaging things to yourself or the life around you in order to get that medication. And that is not what we see with the long-acting psych medications. For short-acting anxiety medications, things like benzodiazepines, Ativan, Valium, Xanax, those are things where we can see an addictive pattern come in, because we know you can get addicted to those solve a very short-term problem. Traditional anxiety and depression medicines, SSRIs, SNRIs, those are Zolofts, Celexa, Effexor, things like that. They take a very long time to work. And so are difficult. You don't get addicted to them. Like I said, your body just kind of gets used to them, versus if you're taking a Xanax, you immediately feel better. So people will do a lot more to reach that. You can feel like, oh, if I just take this, it's a quick fix. You take it away from me and it starts to affect you emotionally, because you're like, no, I want that quick fix. I am going to engage in behaviors in my life that may not be beneficial to people around me. Am I going to, take my mom's medication? Am I going to, that's where we start to see that. So that's a big difference I usually try to make with my patients, is there's a difference between those. Not all anxiety medicine is the same. And it is not addiction if you are on a medicine for a very long time and your body becomes used to it. And very, very different than staying on a benzodiazepine long term, things like Xanax. We know those are harmful and lead to a whole slew of other problems with addiction, but not the other class of the long-term medications for anxiety and depression.
I'm scared of. But I'm scared of all sorts of things. I'm scared of feeling unlike myself. I'm scared of having to spend like a year plus trying out all these different drugs and experiencing all these horrible side effects in the meantime, especially because a lot of SSRIs cause bloating and digestive issues and constipation, which would exacerbate my SIBO and my IBS and all of the horrible GI troubles I've had over the past, 10 years.
And this is a super difficult thing that I see all the time as well, is a lot of the medicines, Zoloft, Prozac, all of these that are going to help your anxiety and depression, initially they can make especially anxiety worse, right? So you should always be told that up front, because it's different for your brain, and your brain's being introduced to a new friend here, and it's going to make it feel anxious, because it's like, what is happening here? It does get better, but in that 1 to 2 week period, usually when you first start, and I have a whole video talking about this, you do get more side effects. You get GI issues, you get bloating, you get diarrhea, you get constipation. You can feel more anxious. You can feel like kind of out of body. It's just like a very odd experience at first. And if you are coming to me saying, hey, Liz, I am having all this diarrhea, constipation, I'm super anxious all the time, and I'm like, great, I'm going to give you this medicine that's going to make that worse at first, that's miserable. And like she was talking about the many different medications, it takes a really long time usually to find the right fit for you, right? We usually pick anxiety and depression medications based on a side effect profile. And we say, hey, what would be the worst side effect for you? Let's avoid a med that'll make that worse. And what other benefit might we get? Some medicines have an alternative benefit kind of like hidden in there. And like Effexor can be great with hot flashes. So if I have someone who is perimenopausal or menopausal and they're like, I'm having horrible hot flashes, I'm also anxious, I'm like, great, let's use this. And we'll kind of capture that one little extra nugget it has, and we'll go with that. But it can be very hard. And it takes, like I said, a long time to start these meds, usually 6 weeks at a minimum, if not 8 to 12 weeks is what most of the research says, for it to reach its max, like to reach a real effect where you can say, hey, this is here. So if you are waiting 3 months every time before you have to decide like, this is just not doing it for me. And then you have to decide, are we altering doses or are we jumping ship and going to a new med? You can imagine, to find the right med for you, this can take a really, really long time. And the process is brutal because the whole time you're feeling like this, and then we have to taper off of it. And it's a brutal process. you can see how this can be incredibly, incredibly difficult. And if you are seeking care for any kind of thing like this, I just hope that you find, if your provider is not understanding about that and doesn't approach it in a way of, hey, I get that this is hard, let's work on this together, where you trust them, this can be really difficult. And I would urge you to find someone you do trust so you can have those conversations, because this, in my experience, just takes a lot of trust between provider and patient of, hey, you're going to have to wait this out. If you have someone that you hate as your healthcare provider and they're like, hey, this is going to make you miserable for a little and it might not even work, you're not going to do it, right?
This is a very complicated and dangerous cycle, and I'm just trying to find the fastest and simplest way to break it. Okay, so I ordered this little testing kit from my doctor. It's essentially a...
Oh boy, wait, let's go backwards. Is this one of those genesight type genetic things? It looks like it. Oh yeah. I just want to see what she says about it.
Genetic test. It's just an oral kind of saliva swab that tests some specific genes that have implications for how different pharmaceutical, anti-anxiety, and antipsychotic, and antidepressants work in the body.
Okay, so, because you see that this was stressing me out a little. So these tests there's many different types of them. GeneSight is a common one here in the US. Abbey is in Canada. If you have Medicaid in the United States, actually this is covered. Most other insurance companies do not cover it because there is not really data to back up its use. So what these tests do is you usually swab your mouth, get your DNA, you send it into a lab, and then they run it for they run it through a test that essentially sees how you metabolize the medicine based on your genes. So basically, different genetic components in your body that you come with, it's a prepackaged deal that you get there. Part of your components, they tell you how you're going to digest and break down medication. This test mostly looks at that. So they're not saying, hey, you have this mental health condition. These are what your genes would do well with to get to, this is a matching med. What they're saying is your body is good at metabolizing it or bad. So you break this down really quickly, you break it down really slowly. And these might be the side effects that you would have it based on how it breaks down, is at least my understanding of it. I have spoken with a lot of psychiatrists about this because initially, in my clinical practice, I was doing clinical in a federally qualified health center, we did these all the time. And then when I came outpatient, I spoke with a psychiatrist who said, we actually don't use those because one, insurance doesn't cover it for non-Medicaid patients. And two, because there's not a lot of utility to it. So there's not a lot of usefulness because it can tell you, hey, this will take a long time to break down and digest, which is somewhat helpful. I mean, that can help if you're like, oh, this is going to take them a long time to clear from their system, so we shouldn't prescribe a very high dose. It can be helpful in that aspect, or you're going to burn through this. Let's give you a little bit more. But all the research we have right now says that really the best thing that this test actually does is gives the provider more confidence in prescribing, which can lead to patients feeling more confident in what they are receiving. So they're more likely to stay on it longer, and we know if you stay on it longer, you have a more chance of success, right? Because you hit that 8 to 12 week mark. If you think, hey, I'm having these terrible side effects, but this test told me that this was a good match for me, so I'm going to stick with it. We have more people hitting that target range where it actually is helpful, and then you see improvement. It hasn't shown improvement in that it's able to correctly identify a good med for you. It can just say, it can provide confidence, which is almost sometimes just as helpful, right? So that is my beef with these. They're usually very expensive without insurance, somewhere in the range of like $400. And I have had so many patients do them because they're so desperate. And then they come to me and they bring these results, and you feel horrible because you're like, I am actually going to not use this as my like prescription Bible, right? I'm going to go with something else. Like, I really think we should try this instead based on these things. And then patients get a lot of times they're upset because they're like, well, I paid all this money for this test and it told me this. I'm like, yeah, but the test doesn't know you. Like, I've worked with you for a long time. I know you. I think this would work better. And the test doesn't actually tell us what you think it does. So that's my soapbox on that. One day, I think this is a very interesting and awesome thing to continue to look into. I feel like if we could narrow down how this actually, what is deficient, what does it target? I think this is the future of medicine. Honestly, I think we're going to genome test people and then have it spit out like these are the medicines that actually will help you. We're just not quite there yet, but I do hope they keep working on it. But I do think the marketing on these things is a little bit shady because they promote it as if we're going to match you with this medicine that's going to fix everything. And that's just not that's just
So
not true.
the concept is that it may help cut down on the kind of exploration phase of trying to figure out which drug and which
that's how they market it.
dosage works for the specific patient. Because we know that like most people spend months, if not years, trying to find an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication that actually works.
And if you're wondering why, it's because the guidelines for anxiety and depression alone are, hey, if you have a patient coming in with anxiety and depression, put them on an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or an SNRI, a selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. But there are like 12 to pick from. And so then it's like, well, which one do I go with? And that's where your history of practice plays in. You look at different side effects. You talk about it with the patient. You know, what side effect would you be willing to tolerate? What would you not? But it takes forever to get there and to get through it, like she said. So I love the concept of this. And early on, I super bought into it until I really dug into it more. And I was like, oh, this is just,
in a dose that doesn't cause all sorts of different unwanted side effects. And obviously my goal here is to reduce the side effects and also reduce the time it takes to get to a good place.
And so with a patient like Abby, this would be something where I would sit down. I have a chart that I made of like side effects and which med, and we would sit down, we would look at it and we would say, hey, these are the meds with the lowest side effect profile for GI stuff. Now here, so like that's a med that I'm going to naturally kind of lean to. However, if you take this, you might be taking on other side effects such as insomnia and everything else. We know you also have insomnia, or you may have more sexual side effects with this other medicine. So that's just a conversation, a very open conversation you and your healthcare provider need to have of balancing what side effects would be the most detrimental for you. So that's kind of the balance of all of it. And you can see how this can get incredibly complicated.
I have some studies. I was like reading up on it online in like their physician brochure. And I think those studies are probably funded by the company themselves. Doesn't render them useless. And I think most of them looks like they have to do more with kind of subjective measures of success. However, I love data. I figured it's worth a go. It's a couple $100.
And so this is awesome. She's talking about, she went through the brochure and she read it. I will link the research article down below. I'll go find it for this specific study. And I'll also go look at the one that I did, that I looked into when I looked into these forever ago, when I was looking into it for my own patients. The subjective matter was provider confidence and perceived provider confidence in prescribing is what they did see the benefit is. So that's a subjective thing. That's not something you can test. Objective would be, oh, my blood pressure went down here. Can't measure that. Subjective would be, oh, I felt more confident. So you did see more in that measure, like she was talking about. I'm really glad she went through and read the study. I'm not surprised. She is very research driven. She's a dietitian, so she's used to that. And it's good to highlight the other thing she mentioned here was the sign of a research study. If it is funded by the company that is promoting the product, which is usually where most studies start, they say, hey, I want to see if this works. So let's test our product. Those are more likely to be biased, right? Because they want you to find the result of, hey, this works really wonderfully. And then, so what usually happens in research is the company that is doing the study releases this, and then other companies, other research institutions will come and test that. They'll say, hey, let's go and do the exact same study, but without the company being involved. And let's see if we can reproduce this without having the bias of being the people that made the medicine. And that's when you start to see meta-analysis, and they'll call them big reviews, and they'll do a bunch of people will do those studies, and then they'll combine them and they'll come to a consensus agreement. And it doesn't mean that, like she said, the data from the study is useless, but usually in practice, we like to see something that was replicated. Was it duplicated by someone who had no financial interest in the outcome? I also have a video on YouTube all about how to determine if a research study is legit or not, or where it falls in there. I made it during COVID because, there were so many people saying, oh, I found this research study. So I tried to break that down into simplified terms that if you haven't, you haven't existed in the healthcare sphere, you can understand. So hopefully that's helpful. I'll leave that linked below too. But I'm really glad she brought that up to kind of just say, hey, they found these studies, and anyone can say we've done a study and it found this. But that doesn't mean a lot based on, because you don't know, you can make a study say pretty much anything. If it's biased. So I appreciate her looking into that.
To do, and it doesn't hurt me to have this information. So if it can help me find a solution that is going to help me feel better faster, I'm all for it. So a few wee updates. I had a call with my psychiatrist, my psychologist, one of my best friends who is also a psychiatrist, and I got my test results back. So we have a lot to unpack. But first of all, I told my friend about the strange night eating episode situation, and she was like, Abby, like maybe your THC is giving you the munchies?
Yes.
And I was like, what? Like, I guess I
On the same
blocked out
brainwave,
that
friend.
common side effect of THC from high school. But after she said that, I was like, you're probably right. Okay, I'm gonna try to cut that out of my sleep cocktail and just like see how I do. And
It's usually the most obvious thing that like most of the time we try to think so clinically. We're like, let me try to dig this apart and like find, we call it in medicine a lot of times they'll say like, don't hear hoofbeats and think zebra, think horse, because horses are more common. And this is a common thing where you're looking for the zebra. You're like, what else could cause this? And it's like, oh wait, you probably are just a little bit got the munchies.
And lo and behold, it's been like 5 nights and I have not felt that strange, overwhelming, ravenous hunger in the middle of the night. Was it the drug? Was it the anxiety? Honestly, I know myself. It was probably the anxiety, to be honest. But I was
And it could even be that now that she has an explanation for it, she's like, oh, okay. If you are a highly data-driven, results-driven type of person, sometimes just having a solution out there, even if it's not the correct solution, I mean, that's why the placebo effect is huge, right? You're like, oh, my brain can rationally say, oh, this is what was causing this. And then it goes away because your brain no longer has to fixate on what is causing it because it has a solution and it's happy with it. So we can move on with our lives, which is a lot of the times why the placebo effect works, right? Oh, you gave me this pill. My brain thinks this is fine now. So we're going to move on and we'll stop worrying about this. Placebo effects obviously doesn't work for everything, but it can be very helpful for things where your brain is just telling you an outright lie.
Now, onto the drugs. So before we got back the genetics test, everyone was in agreement that Cipralex or Lexapro, same thing, different name, was likely the best option for me, which is
okay, cool. So escitalopram is Lexapro, like she said. That is a great medicine if you have other medicines on board. Love that. A huge benefit of Lexapro is it plays well with others. So sometimes if you're taking a bunch of medicines, they can tend to interact. Lexapro is really good at playing with other people. It just kind of like does its own thing. It's like, you know what? You can be taking these other things. She can do Dayvigo and her supplements and it's fine. I'm not going to be affected by it versus something like Zoloft or Celexa that it tends to interact more. So that could be a huge reason why. It's also one that has not too many GI side effects. Pretty much all the medicines for anxiety and depression have GI side effects, especially initially, but Lexapro doesn't have a ton and it doesn't really affect your weight gain too much. It has a fairly low side effect profile. The biggest thing we usually see with this one is some kind of sexual dysfunction, which is again why you have the conversation with your patient and say, hey, how important is all of this to you? Let's find something that's going to be a good fit for you.
It's also what I was kind of hoping for too, because it does have one of the best side effect profiles for most people.
Yep.
So my psychiatrist prescribed that and I spent basically all week kind of hyping myself up to start today. And I was finally feeling at ease and like somewhat prepared and kind of excited about it. Although of course I was still scared. But then over the weekend, I got my genetics test back. And of course, it basically said that all of the SSRIs, including this one, Lexapro, had a higher side effect risk for me.
So this is also where these tests come in and they're frustrating because a lot of times patients will even be doing okay on a med and then this test will come back and because we were waiting for it before and then we started something in the meantime and then they're like, oh well, I don't want to do this one anymore. And it's just like because we know that hey, you could have more reactions to it because you aren't metabolizing the drug very quickly. However, if it is already kind of seeming to work, like let's go with it. This is not the end all be all, but since it's data that the patient has, they treat it like, oh, we need to go by this. And then you're kind of like fighting and you have to really work like in a close way, rely on your relationship with the patient to be like, ignore the paper, trust me here. Like, I really think this is where we should go. And that gets very tricky. Because a lot of the times the medicine that's going to be on the paper will be something where you're like, I really don't think that's going to work well for you, given the side effects that it has. And it gets tricky. And then we're fighting with paper. And then you're like, why is this that's why I was so frustrated when I saw it because I was like, this thing claims to be so much that it's not. And then you finally got somewhere with your patient. And you're like, okay, let's go down this road. And then you get this, then they step in and they're like, well, our research says this. And patients unknowingly, how would you know it's marketed to you this way? Or like, well, I want to switch. And it's just
specifically. So like they could still be used theoretically, but they said to use with caution.
Mm-hmm. And I've had many, 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 many patients. Let me just say, I've had many patients go on to very successfully use medications that were on their definitely don't use list using one of these tests. And they've been just fine. And it's okay. Not always. Throwing that out there, just sometimes.
And
also, pretty much everything shows up on those tests as used with caution, just so you know. It's used with, there's 3 tiers. There's like, definitely don't use, it's red. And then the middle is like use with caution. Everything is used with caution. And then a couple are green lighted. Pretty much all of it's in the definitely don't use or the middle column. I will say it even messes with me as a prescriber. I'm like, well, I don't want to use the ones in the red because that seems scary, even though sometimes that might be the best choice. And I've had luck with them. It's really it's a whole thing.
Like I said earlier, like the test is not perfect. So a lot of people will be on a drug that seems to be working for them, but then the test result will say it's not good for them and vice versa. So it's not that this wouldn't work for me.
Abby,
or
we're on the same brainwave here.
have terrible side effects necessarily, but I just really wanted to go into this with as much confidence as possible to give it a fair shot. Naturally, I was so upset.
You think they're going to happen?
I really just don't know where that even leaves me. Like what are my options at this point? And I have a call on Tuesday with my psychiatrist to really regroup, but like, I just feel so discouraged. And I don't know, unless she has some kind of like miraculous idea, but I'm at the point now where I guess I just kind of feel like there is not going to be a perfect drug for me. And I'm going to have to kind of experience some kind of struggle to get through this and to get better.
I'm wondering if, so her test came back saying all the SSRIs, so the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that's Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa, those aren't going to be good. So I'm assuming that if she wants to go ahead with following the treatment guide, she would pick a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which is an SNRI. For her, probably this best one I would imagine would be Effexor. I would avoid that though, because Effexor has a lot of GI side effects. Like, so that's kind of just me. Obviously I don't know, Abby, but like that would be my hesitancy with that. And the other ones have a whole slew of other things. SNRIs are also harder to come off of. The taper off of them is a lot worse. It takes a lot longer. You usually feel more like, coming off of them feels like you're having a stroke. Honestly, I've done it before. I don't recommend cold turkeying that, but I've done that, of course. But yeah, that would be my hesitation there.
Wait to see what she says. You know, my husband and I talked a lot over the weekend, and he's being so patient and kind, and he's really kind of encouraging me to maybe try to change some things in my life for the next couple weeks before I hop into the medication. I'm not sure that there's a point in that. I'm not sure that like changing my work schedule or him kind of like helping out a little bit extra on certain days or on the weekend is really going to change my brain. It might make me a little bit happier, but at the end of the day, I don't think my anxiety is caused by my unhappiness.
I am not a proponent to just like slap a drug on it for everything, but I do just want to say here on a small soapbox that a lot of times, especially on the internet, you'll go on and it'll be like, medicine is the devil, yoga your way out of it, meditate, sleep, do all of these things, and you can yoga your way out of this. And I am here to tell you, I have done all the things before. I have probably had anxiety and depression since I was a teenager. I just had no idea, like a young teenager, and I just did not know. I thought it was all these other things. I have yogaed, I have meditated, I have done the healthy eating, the sleeping enough, all the things. And sometimes, friends, your brain is it's just a little bit different, right? And so to live in the society we live in and function in the society that we live in, we need a little bit of help, right? We need a little bit of store-bought serotonin, store-bought dopamine, whatever we're getting. And that is okay. That's a huge hurdle that so many people face, is they feel like that they are a failure if they can't do it on their own, that they feel like, well, maybe if I just do this one other thing, right? Because there's all those life coaches out there saying, you don't need medicine. That's going to have all these terrible things that happen to you. And I just want to say that you can't yoga your way out of everything. Okay. I used to give that speech to my patients all the time. Hey, sometimes we have people who are marathon runners and they're on blood pressure medicine because their body's just like, ha, sucker. Like, no, you're going to have high blood pressure. And it's not something to be embarrassed of. It is okay to be on medication. It is okay to be on medication forever, and to people who are like, well, what if long-term side effects from this? And I'm like, but then it's a balance of quality of life, right? If you have no quality of life because you're an anxious ball of stress, okay. You kind of have to decide, is that okay if maybe down the road there is a side effect we don't really know about yet? To me, yes, because my quality of life is 1,000 times better with my store-bought serotonin flowing through the veins, right? If there's something on the other end, and we'll deal with that then. But that's it's a personal decision for you. But I need to get on my soapbox about that, because this is something I hear all the time as patients coming in. They're like, well, maybe if I try one more thing. And it's like, how? And then they get on the medicine if that's right for them finally. And they're like, I wish I had done this so much sooner. Right. And that's just what I want to avoid, is the people who are like, I wasted so many years of my life being so anxious and depressed because I thought it was something that I could yoga my way out of it. And I wish I had just done this sooner. So just something to keep in the back of your mind.
I just hopped on another call with my psychiatrist, and long story short, we kind of like went through the list of the drugs on the genetic test that I took. And, she feels strongly, just based on her experience, that a lot of people will test as saying they're going to have side effects on a particular drug, and they've been taking that drug and it's been totally fine. So she still believes that the Lexapro, like Cipralex, is the best option for me. But we went through like every other option, and most of them that have, decent side effect profiles from her experience are likely going to be too stimulating for me. A lot of them are kind of good for like pain or for concentration and things like that, but I don't need that. And I don't
those
need
other little
stimulating.
nuggets
It's going
that
to
we
be a
get packed in
problem
there.
for me because it's going to be a sleep issue. It's going to make me more kind of nervous in the day. I need to be like sedated a little bit. So I am limited for options. The one she recommended, and she liaised with a colleague who also recommended Effexor. But I've heard scary stories about Effexor.
Ding for Liz.
The main one is that it's very, very hard to get off. And I already have like such an addictive personality that like this, just the idea of having to.
And again, it's not an addiction thing coming off of it. Very frequently confused. It's that your body gets used to it. You wouldn't crave it. If you came off of it, you wouldn't be like, I need another hit of that Effexor. You would just be like, I feel like I'm having a stroke. Like, what is going on? But I can see how that fear can infiltrate, and people don't want to feel tied to something if they have that fear of addiction. But just as a general teaching point, it is different than addiction, but I totally understand how those interlace within each other.
Come off something like that's going to cause me so much.
And coming off of it usually takes a couple of weeks where you taper down the dose. Sometimes you're cross tapering it. You're starting something else while you're coming off of this, but you just taper down the dose. You just take less and less, and then you start skipping days and you come off of it. And with Effexor especially, it just takes a long taper. Zoloft, I can get you off of that without feeling many symptoms in a week and a half, usually. Effexor,
Emotional
more like a
and
month.
physical turmoil. Like, it's so scary. This is like what I was scared of. Basically being like tethered to something for the rest of my life, unable to feel free from it in a time and place where maybe I can just be doing what I got to do on my own without being medicated.
And this is such a huge fear for a lot of people. So I know I've touched on a lot of these different things. It's just, in case you can't tell, a huge topic that I feel really passionately about. A lot of people are afraid that if I start this, I'm going to be on it forever. And I usually bring that back to how long has this been going on? Is this situational? Are you going through a really rough time? Are you in grad school? Are you getting divorced? Do you have teenagers? It's a very common reason people will go on medicine. And then will this situation resolve, right? Because then we can look at and say, hey, first of all, anyone can always come off of these medicines. I always stress that. But first, if it's situational, okay, we know when this stressor is done, we can move on, right? We can probably try tapering it off. Let's see what happens. If you have always felt this way, if you've always struggled with anxiety, if your gut has always been wacky and you haven't slept well in forever, and this is something you can be like, oh my gosh, like the light bulb moment I had, I was like, wow, I have probably struggled with this since I was a teenager. We can always come off. You can always come off of it. We can always trial off of it. I have myself trialed off of it, realized, oh, that's not the reality I would like to live in. I'll go right back on. Thank you. You can always come off. And if anyone ever tells you can't, go find a new healthcare provider. But reassuring to patients also that it's okay. I have a lot of patients who are on blood pressure medicine for the rest of their life. If you have type 1 diabetes, you're going to be taking insulin for the rest of your life, because that is what kind of will get your body to function in a place where we find it optimal. And just because it's something having to do with your brain does not mean that it's something that you don't have to be on, that is like bad to be on forever. I would never shame a patient with a thyroid problem. I'd be like, you haven't resolved that yet? Haven't gotten that fixed up yet? You think you're going to want to be on Synthroid forever? Huh? Like, wow. You probably should have thrown some lifestyle changes in there to fix it. No, we'd say, okay, like this is a chronic conditions. We have it forever. Let's work with it. Always can come off, but also very acceptable to not. And that doesn't make you any less of a person.
And my husband has been so supportive, and he's trying to do all these little things to help me and to make me feel better so that maybe I can just like be happy and not need medication.
And this is a huge guilt thing too. This is something I struggle with all the time. I'm having a hard time with it right now, where you're like, everything is good. If you look at my life objectively, everything is good. People are, trying to do nice things for you, but that it is something with your brain. It is not something that you can be like, why can't I just be more grateful and more happy and less worried? It is nothing that other people can do to you. They can help. Having a supportive family, a supportive partner, that is immensely helpful. However, that will never infiltrate what is going on in here. You know what I mean? Because your brain is not perceiving in these situations. It's not perceiving reality in a clear and logical way. Okay. So that comes with a lot of guilt. Again, this is where therapy is really helpful, where it can help you work through that and be like, I'm not processing this quite how I should. It's not that I'm an ungrateful, always, you'll hear a lot of people be like, oh, you're trying to find the silver lining in that cloud. Like, trying to find the bad part of every situation. And it's literally how your brain is working. It is not your fault. You are not ungrateful. You are not seeing the good side. And so if that's you, that's also me. This is a pep talk equally for myself of it is not you. You can't think your way out of this. Your husband can't do enough nice things that would make this all of a sudden go away, and try as much as you can to not feel guilty about that.
No, so even if he were
Exactly.
to take me away to live in the south of Spain with no responsibilities, I would still not sleep at night. I would find something to be anxious about. It's a problem with my brain. And so
I'd find
I
something to worry
feel
about.
strongly
Yep.
that I do need to
Same.
do this for myself, even though I'm so scared.
And that's hard to accept.
So I'm probably going to end
for a
up
lot of
going
people.
with the Ciprolex, the Lexapro, even though I'm scared to have a document staring in front of me that says I'm probably going to react poorly to it. I'm just going to hope for the best.
And that's why, again, I don't recommend that test, because if you never have that document, you don't have that added layer of I'm doing something that now I expect to have a bad reaction with. But I am honestly glad that she's going with the Lexapro instead. I think that, I don't know her personally, but to me, that would be a better option looking at this. But it's paralyzing. And something I want to stress to you, if you aren't someone with anxiety or depression, but you love someone who is, sitting with them is the best thing you can do. Don't try to fix it. Fixing is stressful, right? Because you're like, that's implying that this is something that you can actually, that this person experiencing anxiety can just work their way through. If there was a solution, we probably would have done it. You know what I mean? So all you can do is just sit there with people. It's the best thing, honestly. Sit there with people and be like, this is hard. And I love you for you. I love you for you, your anxious little self. Like, I love you. All of you. That's the absolute best thing. Don't provide solutions. That just makes it so much worse. Don't ask us to explain things. Just sit, be with us, and let us know we're loved.
Update. I ended up getting a second opinion, and we decided to avoid the SSRIs based on my genetic findings and instead try a non-SSRI drug called vilazodone, which is actually an antidepressant, but they are apparently seeing some good results for anxiety as like an off-label option.
Oh, Canada. So this is where we go into the branch of, so she's getting prescribed Vibrid, and it is a medicine that in the US, you have to fail at least 2 medicines in the SSRI category before you would even be considered to be allowed to take it. And then it is usually not covered by your insurance until you hit your max deductible, which for most people is about $8,000. And then maybe you can get it. Very expensive, very, very impressive though. Very few side effects. There are a lot of new medicines that are coming out for anxiety and depression that I don't have a lot of experience prescribing myself because they are so hard to get and they are so expensive. But she lives in Canada, where they, I guess, don't torture people before they give them their healthcare. They just say, hey, this would probably be best. And then you get to try it versus, hey, we know this is probably the end target for you. This is what would be best, but you're going to have to spend a year suffering before we get there.
But I know that this is going to be a journey. Like, it's a process. So not unlike when I went through IVF, I know that this is not a quick fix. Like, I just have to put my head down and expect that the process may be long, maybe windy, it might be messy, but the end result will hopefully be all worth it. So I'm still taking the Dayvigo and my melatonin for sleep, which
yes. And like she said, it's a combination of things too. It's never just medicine. It's usually medicine and therapy, which then if you're taking the medicine, you might be able to imagine exercising again. You know what I mean? Like taking care of your body in all the ways possible, feeding it good foods, making sure you get body movement in every day, resting. Like, it's all in balance with each other. And a lot of times the medicine's just the thing that gets you to the point where you could imagine doing those self-care tasks.
Probably kind of like helping to buffer some of the trouble sleeping side effects of the vilazodone. And our long-term plan is to get me to like my happy dose on the vilazodone. And then to transition from my Dayvigo, which is my sleep aid, to something called trazodone, which is apparently like a less addictive sleep option. And then because that one is a little easier to wean off of, I will slowly try to wean.
So Dayvigo is something that will, it turns off the part of your brain that says, hey, you should stay awake. And so it works very effectively for a lot of people. It's not supposed to be, have an addictive property. Sometimes if you hear of people being on, what's the medicine called? Ambien, duh, Liz. Sometimes a lot of times if you're taking something like Ambien, your body can kind of forget it pushes you into sleep by turning on like the sleep, I like to tell people, but that your body can kind of forget how to go to sleep on its own versus something with a Dayvigo, it turns off the awake part. So both very effective. Dayvigo is not as addicting. It's just addicting in the lifestyle habit of it, of like, if I take this, I will go to sleep. Trazodone is actually an antidepressant that was found to be better used for sleep. They're like, this is not very helpful as an antidepressant, but it actually helps people with sleep. It does have the added benefit of it can help with depression. So that could definitely be a good option to add on to her, especially since she's not taking a SSRI. Since if you take both of those, you can end up getting something called serotonin syndrome. And now we're on a tangent. Let's go back. Most of you are probably like, why
myself off of that when I feel like I'm at a good place with my anxiety. So that's the long-term plan. And I feel hopeful. Like usually I feel like a complete failure about my anxiety and my insomnia.
I also really love that they have a road ahead. This is something that I really like to stress with my own patients is we have, where are we going? Like this is the short-term plan. And then how are we going to long-term get to here? Because it helps people feel more in control of their healthcare, more like they have an actual say, like they are driving the ship too, not just like me being like, hey, let's try this. Very, very helpful to know where you are going. To know. And if you need, or if you're a person that needs an out, like, hey, I need to know eventually I can come off of this. Also very helpful.
But for the first time in a really long time, I feel like I have a plan and I feel like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then it's actually not that far away.
Awesome. Oh, I am so glad she did that. So that is kind of walking through of what I would talk someone through if you're in my office of dealing with any kind of mental health diagnoses where we're starting medication. Like I said, check out those other videos below. I have a ton on mental health things. I'm hugely passionate about it. And yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know if you want an update, if you want me to react to her updates that she provides, if you like other videos like this, or you have anything else you want me to react to similar to this. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. A huge shout out to my new channel members, Velda Sarant, Blue Ridge Nurse, and Chelsea Crum. I so appreciate all of you who support the channel by being a member and getting access to those perks, but also very much appreciate all of you who just come here, show up to the videos, and improve the vital signs of the video by liking, subscribing, and doing all of those other YouTube-y things. The YouTube gods absolutely love it, and it helps promote the video to other people. I hope you always remember that you are enough, just as you are, just as your brain is. You are enough. You are not alone ever, no matter what it feels like. And you, my friend, can do hard things. See you next time. Bye.